The year was 1889, and the dusty streets of Oak Ridge, Nebraska stretched under a merciless sun that turned the prairie grass golden and brittle. This was a land of second chances, where the desperate and the hopeful came seeking redemption. It was here, at the weathered train station with its peeling paint and crooked sign, that the mail-order brides arrived each month, their lives packed into worn leather suitcases, and their dreams folded carefully in their hearts. Thomas Brennan stood apart from the other men crowding the platform. At 34, he was older than most prospective grooms, his face carved by wind and worry into something harder than it should have been. His farm lay 5 miles outside town, a modest spread of wheat fields, and a small herd of cattle that he tended alone. The loneliness had become a physical thing, settling into his bones like the winter cold. He'd finally written to the matrimonial agency 3 months ago, his rough hands struggling to form the words on paper. Before we continue with Thomas's story, we want to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss our next incredible tale. Hit that bell icon to stay notified. The train's whistle cut through the afternoon air, and Thomas felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Around him, other men straightened their collars, checked their pocket watches, adjusted their hats. They were merchants, clerks, a banker, a blacksmith, men with established homes and respectable positions. Thomas looked down at his calloused hands, dirt still embedded under his nails despite his scrubbing that morning. The train hissed to a stop, steam billowing across the platform. Women began to descend, each one greeted by a man holding a handwritten sign or a photograph. Thomas watched as pretty girls in traveling clothes stepped down, their eyes scanning the crowd with mixtures of hope and apprehension. The banker claimed a petite blonde. The blacksmith swept up a tall brunette with a ready smile. One by one, the platform emptied. Thomas stood alone now, his sign hanging limply at his side. The conductor was helping one final passenger, and Thomas felt something clench in his chest. The woman who emerged moved differently than the others. Her hand gripped the conductor's arm tightly, and she descended each step with careful deliberation, her free hand extended slightly, fingers trembling in the air as if reading invisible words. She was blind. Thomas's breath caught. The woman was perhaps 25, with auburn hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was worn but clean, patched at the elbows with careful stitches, but it was her face that held him. Delicate features, set with a dignity that seemed out of place in someone so clearly vulnerable. Her sightless eyes were a pale gray, like morning fog over the prairie, and they stared straight ahead with a disconcerting intensity. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell," the conductor called out. "Is there anyone here for Miss Eleanor Hartwell?" Thomas looked at his sign. His bride's name was supposed to be Sarah Mitchell. He glanced around the now empty platform. There had been some mistake. Clearly, this blind woman was not his mail-order bride. He should leave, head back to his farm, write to the agency about the mix-up. But Eleanor stood there, her fingers clutching a small embroidered handkerchief, her head held high despite the obvious fear radiating from her rigid posture. The conductor looked uncomfortable. "Miss, perhaps there's been some confusion. Are you certain someone was meant to meet you? I was told there would be a Mr. Brennan," Eleanor said, her voice steady but soft, with an accent that suggested education, perhaps from back east. "The agency assured me everything was arranged." Thomas felt the words escape before he could stop them. "I'm Thomas Brennan." Eleanor's head turned sharply toward his voice. The conductor looked relieved. "Well then, there we are. I'll just fetch the lady's trunk." He practically fled. Thomas approached slowly, his boots heavy on the wooden platform. Up close, he could see the fine trembling in Eleanor's hands, the way she gripped that handkerchief like a lifeline. There was something embroidered on it, he noticed, a pattern he couldn't quite make out. "Mr. Brennan," Eleanor said, her voice carefully controlled, "I understand this may not be what you expected. The agency said they would inform you of my condition. If they fail to do so, I will not hold you to any agreement. I can work to earn passage back to Philadelphia." The pride in her voice struck something in Thomas. This woman, blind and alone in a strange place, wasn't begging. She was offering him an escape while maintaining her dignity. "Did the agency tell you about me?" Thomas asked quietly. Eleanor hesitated. "They said you were a farmer, a good man, unmarried. That's all I needed to know." "Nothing else?" Thomas pressed. "Nothing about why a man my age might be writing to a matrimonial agency. I assume," Eleanor said carefully, "that you had your reasons, as I had mine." Thomas looked at her properly then. Despite the worn dress, Despite the blindness, there was something about Eleanor that spoke of strength. She stood straight-backed, her chin level, facing a world she couldn't see with more courage than most sighted people he knew. "I'm not much to look at," Thomas said finally. "I've got a small farm, barely profitable some years. I lost my first wife and son 7 years ago to fever. I'm not educated and I'm not wealthy, but I work hard, and I keep my word." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "And I am blind, Mr. Brennan. I cannot cook by sight, though I can by touch and smell and memory. I cannot mend clothes by watching my needle, but I can feel my way. I cannot see the beauty of your farm, but I can feel the sun on my face and hear the wind in the wheat. I will not be a burden to you, but I cannot be a conventional wife either." "How did you—" Thomas started, then stopped. The question felt intrusive. "Lose my sight?" Eleanor finished. "An accident. 3 years ago. I worked as a governess, but after—" She trailed off, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "My options became limited. The agency was my last chance at something other than an asylum or begging." The brutal honesty of it hit Thomas hard. This woman had been pushed to the edges of society, just as he had in his own way, both of them grasping at this desperate arrangement. "The wagon's at the livery," Thomas said, making his decision. "It's a 5-mile ride to the farm. We should marry today, at the church if you're willing. Then we can head home before dark." Eleanor's relief was visible, though she tried to hide it. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, might as well start with first names." He hesitated, then offered his arm. "The platform has 3 steps down, then it's about 50 paces to Main Street." Eleanor's hand found his arm, and Thomas noticed how light her touch was, just enough contact to follow his movements. As they walked, he described the surroundings: the general store on the left, the hotel on the right, the church steeple visible at the end of the street. "You don't have to do that," Eleanor said quietly. "Do what?" "Describe everything. I know it's tiresome." "It's not tiresome," Thomas replied, surprised to find he meant it. "It's my town. Seems only right you should know it. The preacher at St. Augustine's church was a round man named Father Macready, who asked no questions when Thomas explained they needed a quick ceremony. Perhaps he saw these rushed marriages too often to be shocked." Eleanor stood beside Thomas at the altar, her hand still clutching that handkerchief, her voice clear and steady as she spoke her vows. Thomas's voice roughened when he said his own vows. Memories of standing in this same spot with Mary flickering through his mind. But Eleanor wasn't Mary. This was something different entirely. Not a love match, but perhaps something that could become companionable. When Father Macready pronounced them married, Thomas awkwardly took Eleanor's hand. It was small and cold in his. "We should go," he said softly. "It's a long ride." The wagon ride to the farm was mostly silent. Thomas kept the horses to a steady pace, aware of every bump that made Eleanor grip the seat. He found himself describing the landscape without thinking about it. The way the wheat fields stretched golden to the horizon, the cottonwood trees marking the creek boundary, the hawks circling overhead. "You have a good voice for describing things," Eleanor said after a while. "Clear, precise, not flowery." "Never been much for flowery talk," Thomas admitted. "I appreciate that." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Your wife and son, what were their names?" The question caught Thomas off guard. Most people avoided mentioning Mary and Jacob, as if speaking their names would cause him pain. But Eleanor couldn't see his face, couldn't gauge his reaction, so she asked directly. "Mary and Jacob," he said. "He was 5. I'm sorry," Eleanor said simply. "That's an unbearable loss. It was a long time ago. Time doesn't heal everything, though. It just teaches us to carry the weight differently." Thomas glanced at her, surprised by her insight. "How did you get so wise?" Eleanor's smile was sad. "Pain is an excellent teacher, Thomas." The farm appeared as they crested the final hill. A modest 2-story house, weathered but solid, surrounded by wheat fields and a barn that needed repairs. Thomas pulled the horses to a stop in the yard, then jumped down to help Eleanor. 6 steps to the porch," he said, guiding her carefully. "The door opens inward. Mind your head on the frame." Inside, the house smelled of dust and disuse. Thomas realized suddenly how it must seem, or rather, how Eleanor must sense it. He'd been living alone for so long, eating simple meals, sleeping in whichever room was warmest, letting the housekeeping slide beyond basic functionality. "It needs a woman's touch," he said apologetically. Eleanor's fingers trailed along the wall, the back of a chair, the edge of a table. "It needs cleaning," she said without judgment, "and airing out, but the bones are good. I can feel that." "Your room, our room," Thomas stumbled over the words. "I mean, you'll have the main bedroom upstairs. I've been sleeping in the small room down here. I'll continue that way. I won't. This doesn't have to be a real marriage. Not in all ways." Eleanor turned toward his voice, her expression unreadable. "That's kind of you," And practical. We barely know each other. Right, Thomas agreed, though he felt strangely deflated by her easy acceptance. That first night, Thomas lay in his narrow bed downstairs, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in his house, the creak of floorboards overhead, the soft murmur of Eleanor's voice as she talked herself through the layout of the room, the gentle thud of her trunk being unpacked. He wondered what he'd done, bringing this blind woman to his isolated farm. What had he been thinking? How could this possibly work? But when he woke before dawn, as was his habit, he found Eleanor already in the kitchen. She'd somehow found the coffee, the pot, the pump for water. The smell of brewing coffee filled the room. "I woke you," Eleanor said, not turning from the stove. "I'm sorry. I tried to be quiet." "I always wake early," Thomas said, amazed. "How did you find everything?" Eleanor's smile was slight. "I spent an hour after you went to bed mapping the kitchen, counting steps, feeling the position of things. I'll need to do the same for the rest of the house, if that's all right. I need to build a mental picture." Over the following days, Thomas watched Eleanor transform. She methodically learned every inch of the house, her fingers trailing over surfaces, her feet counting steps, her mind cataloging everything. She organized the kitchen in a way that made sense to her. Heavy items low where they couldn't fall, light items where she could reach them easily. Everything in its precise place. She cooked by touch and smell, her hands confident as they measured flour, tested the heat of the stove, kneaded bread dough. The meals were simple but good, better than anything Thomas had made for himself in years. But it was in the small moments that Thomas found himself truly watching her. The way she tilted her head to catch sounds, the birds in the morning, the wind direction, the approach of the milk cow, the way her fingers moved over the vegetables from the garden, selecting the ripe ones with uncanny accuracy, the way she sat on the porch in the evening, her face turned toward the setting sun she couldn't see, that embroidered handkerchief always in her hands. "What's on that handkerchief?" Thomas asked one evening. 3 weeks into their marriage, they'd fallen into an easy routine. He'd work the fields, she'd manage the house, and they'd share meals with comfortable conversation. Eleanor's fingers stilled on the embroidery. "It was my mother's, the last thing I have of her." "Can I see it?" Eleanor hesitated, then handed it over. Thomas examined the delicate stitching. It was a pattern of flowers, roses, and lilies, intricate and beautiful, but tucked in one corner was something else, harder to see in the fading light. "There are letters," he said, "small ones, woven into the design. E.H.M. Eleanor Helena Morgan," Eleanor said softly. "My full name, before I married." "Morgan?" Thomas frowned. "Any relation to the Philadelphia Morgans?" Eleanor's face went still. "You've heard of them. Everyone's heard of them. Railroad money. One of the richest families in America." Thomas looked at Eleanor with new eyes. "You're one of those Morgans?" "I was," Eleanor said quietly, "before the accident. After I lost my sight, my father had me declared incompetent. Said I was an embarrassment to the family. My sister Emma, she was the one who embroidered this handkerchief for me before I was sent away." "Sent away?" Thomas's voice hardened. "To where?" "An institution for the infirm and feeble-minded." It was, Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "It was not kind. I was there for 2 years before I convinced a nurse to help me escape. I made my way to the matrimonial agency with what little money Emma had sewn into my dress hems." Thomas felt fury building in his chest. "Your own father put you in an asylum for being blind, for being an imperfect daughter," Eleanor corrected bitterly. "For losing my usefulness, for no longer being able to marry well and increase the family's social standing. In my father's world, I had become worthless." "That's not," Thomas started, then stopped, because he was beginning to understand. "That's why you came here. You weren't just looking for a husband. You were hiding." Eleanor's hands twisted the handkerchief. "I hoped I would be far enough away, that no one would think to look for Eleanor Morgan in the wilds of Nebraska. Married to a farmer, I hoped I could simply disappear into a normal life. And if they find you, my father can have me declared legally incompetent. He can force me back. The law doesn't protect women like me, Thomas, especially not blind women. I have no rights, no legal standing. I'm property, essentially." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're not property here. You're my wife. And I don't care how rich your father is. He's not taking you anywhere you don't want to go." Eleanor turned her face toward him, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You don't know what you're saying. The Morgans are powerful. They could destroy you." "Let them try." Thomas's voice was steel. "I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid of rich men." But 3 days later, Thomas learned exactly what the Morgan family was capable of when a fine carriage appeared in his yard. The man who emerged was dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes cold as winter ice. Behind him stood 2 large men who were clearly hired muscle. "I am Herbert Morgan," the man announced. "I've come for my daughter." Thomas had been mending fence, and he approached slowly, deliberately leaving his tools behind. Eleanor had heard the carriage and stood frozen on the porch, her face drained of color. "Your daughter is married now," Thomas said calmly. "Eleanor Brennan. Her name isn't Morgan anymore." Herbert's lip curled. "A marriage to an illiterate farmer, easily annulled. My daughter was mentally incompetent when she entered into that agreement. It has no legal standing." "I can read and write just fine," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And your daughter is sharper than most sighted people I know. There's nothing incompetent about her. She's blind." Herbert spat the word. "Unable to care for herself. A danger to herself and others. I have medical testimony to that effect." "Medical testimony from doctors you paid," Eleanor said, finding her voice. She walked carefully down the porch steps, her hand trailing the railing. "From men who never examined me, never spoke to me, who signed papers in exchange for your money." "Silence," Herbert commanded. "You will pack whatever meager belongings you have. These men will assist you to the carriage." "I'm not going. You have no choice. You're my daughter, and you're unwell. The law is on my side." Thomas stepped between Herbert and Eleanor. "The law says a man is responsible for his wife. She's mine now. You've got no claim." Herbert's smile was reptilian. "Actually, I do. You see, I've brought documentation showing that Eleanor escaped from legal confinement. She's a fugitive, essentially. And I've also brought evidence that this marriage was contracted under false pretenses. She never disclosed her mental incompetence. That makes it fraudulent." "That's not true," Thomas said, but he could feel the trap closing. "Moreover," Herbert continued, pulling papers from his coat, "I've taken the liberty of examining your financial situation, Mr. Brennan. You're 3 months behind on your bank payments. Your farm is mortgaged to the hilt. I've purchased that debt, which means that unless you can pay $5,000, he checked his pocket watch carelessly, within the next hour you'll lose everything. And without a home or livelihood, you certainly can't care for a dependent wife." Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. $5,000. He didn't have 500. He didn't have 50. "You can't do this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I can, and I have." Herbert gestured to his men. "Now, Eleanor, let's not make this unpleasant." "Wait," Eleanor said suddenly. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the embroidered handkerchief. With shaking fingers, she began to unpick the stitching in one corner. "What are you doing?" Herbert demanded. Eleanor didn't answer. Her fingers worked with practiced precision, pulling thread after thread. And then something fell from the hidden pocket in the handkerchief. A key. Small, brass, old-fashioned. "What is that?" Thomas asked. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a knife. "Insurance. Father, do you recognize it?" Herbert's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Emma gave it to me, before you had me committed. She wanted me to have leverage, in case I ever needed it." Eleanor held the key up. "This opens the safe in your study, the one where you keep the real account books, the ones that show how you've been defrauding your investors, cooking your railroad's financial reports, bribing politicians, the ones that would send you to prison if they ever became public." "You're bluffing," Herbert said, but his voice shook. "Emma made copies," Eleanor continued calmly. "She has them stored with a lawyer in New York, a lawyer who has instructions to release them to the newspapers if anything happens to her. Or to me." "Emma wouldn't. Emma loved me," Eleanor cut him off. "More than she feared you. She told me that if you ever tried to take me back, I should tell you that she's ready to burn down everything you've built, every railroad line, every political connection, every dollar of your fortune. She'll destroy it all unless you leave me alone." Thomas watched Herbert's face cycle through emotions. Rage, fear, calculation. The man was trapped, and he knew it. "She has nothing." Herbert tried once more. "No proof." Eleanor pulled a folded paper from inside her dress. "This is a letter from Emma, dated 2 weeks ago. She knew you'd come looking eventually." "Read it." Herbert snatched the letter, his hands trembling as he scanned the contents. Whatever he saw there drained the blood from his face. "She wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't she?" Eleanor tilted her head. "You cast me aside, Father. Did you really think Emma would forgive that? She's been planning this for 3 years, waiting for you to make your move. And now you have." Herbert crumpled the letter in his fist. "If those documents become public, then leave me alone," Eleanor said simply. "Tear up whatever legal papers you've prepared. Sell Thomas's mortgage back to the bank. Go back to Philadelphia and never contact me again. That's the deal. My silence for my freedom. You'd blackmail your own father. You'd imprison your own daughter," Eleanor shot back. "Consider us even." The standoff lasted another long, tense minute. Then Herbert turned sharply to his men. "We're leaving. Now." "And the mortgage?" Thomas pressed. Herbert pulled out another set of papers, signed something hastily, and thrust them at Thomas. "It's yours, free and clear. Consider it a wedding gift." The words dripped with venom. As the carriage pulled away, Thomas and Eleanor stood in the yard, neither speaking until the dust settled. Then Thomas turned to his wife, really looked at her, and saw her completely for the first time. "You had that leverage all along," he said slowly. "You could have used it any time, could have gotten money from your father, property, anything. Why didn't you?" Eleanor's hands shook as she carefully folded the handkerchief, tucking the key back into its hiding place. "Because that would have meant staying connected to him, staying Eleanor Morgan instead of becoming Eleanor Brennan. I didn't want his money. I wanted to be free of him entirely, but you used it to save the farm, to save me." "To save us," Eleanor corrected softly. She turned toward him, her gray eyes meeting his even though she couldn't see him. "This is my home now, Thomas. These 3 weeks. I felt more alive, more useful, more myself than I have in 3 years. You treated me like a person, not a defective doll. You described your world to me so I could see it in my own way. You never once made me feel like a burden." Thomas felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen since Mary and Jacob died. "Eleanor, I know this wasn't a real marriage," Eleanor continued, her voice strengthening. "I know you married me out of loneliness, and perhaps pity, but I'm asking now, truly, asking, could it become real? Could you see me not as the blind woman you rescued, but as someone who might actually be your partner?" Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to sense his movement, and took her hand. "I stopped seeing you as blind about 2 weeks ago," he admitted. "Now I just see Eleanor. Strong, brilliant, brave Eleanor, who somehow learned to cook on my temperamental stove, who organized my disaster of a barn, who sits on the porch every evening and tells me what she hears in the wind." He paused. "Who just faced down one of the richest men in America without flinching." Eleanor laughed, a sound mixing relief and joy. "I was terrified. You didn't show it. Neither did you." Thomas tugged her hand gently, pulling her closer. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but I can show you the farm properly if you'd like. Not just the house, but everything. The wheat fields, the creek, the cottonwoods. I can describe it all so you can see it your way." "I'd like that," Eleanor whispered. "And Thomas, I think I'm falling in love with this place. With this life." She hesitated. "With you." Thomas felt his throat tighten. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Then I guess we should make this a proper marriage after all." Eleanor's smile was radiant. "I guess we should." That evening, as the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, Thomas and Eleanor sat together on the porch. He described the colors in the sky, the golds and purples and reds. Eleanor listened, her head resting against his shoulder, her embroidered handkerchief safely tucked away. She'd used her leverage, burned her bridge to her old life completely. Herbert Morgan would never risk approaching her again, not with his empire hanging in the balance. Eleanor was free, truly free, for the first time in 3 years. And Thomas, who'd thought himself dead inside, who'd believed he'd never love again, found himself describing the sunset with a passion he'd forgotten he possessed. Because now, he was seeing it through Eleanor's heart, as much as his own eyes, and it was more beautiful than it had ever been. "Tell me about the wheat," Eleanor said softly, "how it moves in the wind." Thomas smiled and began to describe his fields, his words painting pictures that Eleanor could see in her own way, through touch and sound and feeling. And as he talked, he realized that Eleanor hadn't just saved his farm that day. She'd saved something far more valuable. She'd saved him. In the years that followed, Thomas and Eleanor Brennan became something of a legend in Oakridge. Folks marveled at how the blind woman ran her household with precision, how she could tell when the bread was perfectly baked by scent alone, how she kept more organized ledgers than most shopkeepers, despite not being able to see the numbers she carefully transcribed in raised marks. But what people remembered most was the way Thomas looked at his wife, like she was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever encountered, and the way Eleanor would smile when she heard his voice, turning toward him with absolute trust and love. The handkerchief, with its hidden key and its embroidered flowers, stayed safe in Eleanor's dresser. She never needed to use its leverage again. Emma Morgan, true to her word, never released the documents but kept them as insurance, a silent guardian protecting her sister from afar. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the wheat whispered in the wind and the sun painted colors across the sky, Thomas would describe the world to Eleanor in vivid detail, and Eleanor would listen, her hand in his, seeing everything that mattered through his words and through her heart. Because sometimes the most beautiful things in life aren't seen with eyes at all. They're felt in the warmth of a hand, heard in the timbre of a voice, and known in the quiet certainty that you've finally found home. The blind bride who no one wanted had become the beloved wife that one man couldn't imagine living without, and the lonely farmer who'd lost everything had found that love, real love, didn't require perfect sight. It only required the courage to truly see each other's hearts. What did you think of Eleanor and Thomas's story? Did the plot twist surprise you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.